They poured wine over my head. The mafia boss just stood there, cold, detached, as if the scene had nothing to do with him. Only when night fell did mafia boss Dante Valente come to find me. He took off his suit jacket and said the words that made me forget how to breathe. The last time I saw that scar, it was on the person who saved my life. I didn't answer. I just listened to the sound of wine dripping from my hair onto the floor, blending with the chaos of my heartbeat. 5 years ago, I saved a man from the burning ruins. I never imagined that man would one day become my employer, the one powerful enough to make the entire world kneel because of a single scar on my shoulder. I am Lina Morales, the maid humiliated before the eyes of the mafia. And he is Dante Valente, the man who makes anyone who dares to touch me pay in blood. I was wiping down the mahogany table in the Valente mansion's dining hall when it happened. The air was thick with perfumed cigar smoke and the clink of crystal glasses. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. I'd been a maid here for 6 months, long enough to know the rules: keep your head down, don't make eye contact, and never ever spill anything. But Vivienne Laurent, all sharp cheekbones and sharper tongue, had other plans. I was carrying a tray of empty glasses when she stepped right into my path, of her white dress gleaming under the chandelier. My elbow grazed her arm and her wineglass tipped, splashing red across her skirt. The room froze. I felt the weight of every eye on me, like I'd just set off a bomb. "Oh, sweetheart," Vivienne said, her voice dripping with fake pity. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You really should know your place." Before I could say a word, she grabbed a bottle of Merlot from the table and poured it over my head. The wine ran down my face, soaking my uniform, dripping onto the marble floor. Laughter erupted around me, sharp, cruel, like knives. I stood there, the cold liquid stinging my eyes, while phones came out recording every second. I heard someone whisper, "Mafia boss's maid humiliated." My cheeks burned, but I didn't move. I didn't cry, I just knelt to pick up the shattered glass, my hands shaking as I gathered the pieces. As I crouched there, the light caught something on the floor, a reflection in a shard of glass. It was a symbol etched faintly like a tattoo of a coiled snake. My breath caught. I knew that mark. It was the same as the scar on my shoulder, the one I'd carried for 5 years from a night I never talked about. I glanced up, and there was Dante Valente, the man who owned this house, this world. He stood at the head of the room, his face unreadable, his dark eyes locked on me. I waited for him to say something to stop this. He didn't. He just watched like I was nothing. My stomach twisted, but I kept my head down and kept cleaning. The next morning, I was folding linens in the back room when Vivienne's voice cut through the silence. She was on the phone, her laughter sharp as she spoke to someone I couldn't see. The maid. "Oh, she's nothing. Just a little mouse who thinks she can scurry into Dante's bed." I froze, my fingers tightening on the cloth. A few of the other maids were nearby, their eyes darting to me, some smirking, others looking away. I wanted to march out there and slap the phone from her hand, but I didn't. I folded another napkin, pressing the creases so hard my knuckles turned white. Then I heard her say my name, Lina Morales, like it was a punchline. "She's got no family, no money. She's just here to clean up our messes." I set the napkin down, my hands steady, and walked out of the room, my chin high. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I need to take a second here, guys. If this story's hitting you, if you've ever felt like the world was laughing at you, please open your phone, like this video, leave a comment below, and hit that subscribe button. It means the world to me to know you're out there listening, feeling this with me. Your support keeps me going, and I want you to walk this journey with me. Okay, let me get back to it. The rest of the night was a blur. I scrubbed the wine out of my hair in the servants' quarters, the cold water mixing with the red stains on my skin. My uniform was ruined, and I could still hear the laughter echoing in my head. I was used to being invisible. Lina Morales, the girl from a nowhere town scraping by on minimum wage, always one bad day from falling apart. But that moment with Vivienne's smile and the crowd's jeers, it cut deeper than I expected. I kept scrubbing, trying to wash away the shame, when I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. I turned, and there was Dante filling the doorway. He was tall, broad, his suit tailored to every inch of his frame. His eyes, though, those were what stopped me. They weren't cold anymore. They were searching. He didn't say anything at first. Just took off his jacket, draped it over a chair, and handed me a towel. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a streak of wine on my neck. His voice was low, steady, like he was commenting on the weather. I took the towel, my hands still trembling, and wiped my skin. That's when he stepped closer. His gaze dropping to my shoulder where my uniform had slipped, exposing the scar. His jaw tightened. "The last time I saw that mark," he said almost to himself, "it was on the woman who saved my life." I froze. 5 years ago, I'd been working a night shift at a diner when a man stumbled in, bleeding, barely conscious. There'd been an explosion down the street, a car bomb, the news said later. I dragged him into the back, patched him up with a first aid kit, and stayed until the paramedics came. He was gone before I could get his name. I never told anyone about it, not even my mom. The scar on my shoulder came from a piece of shrapnel that night, a reminder of the chaos. I looked at Dante, my heart pounding. "That was you," I whispered. He nodded just once. Then he leaned in, his voice so low it felt like a secret. "They spilled wine on my savior. They'll drown in it." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to piece it together. Dante Valente, the most feared man in the city, owed me his life. It didn't make sense. I was nobody. But the way he looked at me, like he saw something no one else did, it made my chest ache. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned a long time ago that trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I just nodded and turned back to the sink, scrubbing harder like I could erase the whole night. A few days later, I was polishing silverware in the kitchen when one of Dante's men, a wiry guy named Tommy, leaned against the counter, smirking. "Heard you're the boss's new favorite," he said, his voice slick with mockery. He tossed a rag at me, missing on purpose so it landed in a sink full of dirty water. "Better clean up quick, princess. Don't want to keep Dante waiting." The other guys laughed, their eyes glinting with something mean. I didn't flinch. I picked up the rag, wrung it out, and kept polishing, my movements slow and deliberate. Tommy leaned closer, his breath hot on my neck. "What's it like, Lena? Being the boss's little charity case?" I set the fork down, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "It's like knowing I'm worth more than you'll ever be." His smirk vanished, and I walked away, my heart pounding but my steps steady. The next morning, things got worse. Vivian wasn't done with me. By noon, whispers were spreading through the mansion like wildfire. "Lena's sleeping with the boss," they said, trying to climb her way out of the gutter. I heard it from the cooks, the drivers, even the other maids. People who'd smiled at me yesterday now sneered, their eyes cutting through me like I was trash. Vivian had started the rumor, I knew it. She'd posted it on some dark corner of the internet where the mafia types traded gossip like currency. I tried to ignore it, kept my head down, but it followed me everywhere, every glance, every whisper. Then came the paperwork. Marco Santoro, Dante's right-hand man, slid a resignation form across the table in the servants' hall. He was all charm with his slicked-back hair and easy smile, but his eyes were hard. "Sign it," he said. "You don't belong here, Lena. Not anymore." I stared at the paper, my hands clenched in my lap. I'd seen Marco around, always loyal to Dante, always watching. Now he was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. I didn't sign. I just pushed the paper back and stood up, my voice steady. "I'm not done here." His smile faltered just for a second, but it was enough. Later that week, I was sweeping the hallway when I overheard two of Dante's men talking in hushed tones. "She's trouble," one said, his voice low. "Marco says she's got something on the boss, some old debt." The other laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "A maid with leverage. She'll be dead by next week." My broom stilled, the bristles pressed hard against the floor. I didn't look up, but my hands tightened around the handle until my knuckles ached. They didn't know I was there, didn't know I'd heard. I kept sweeping, each stroke louder than the last, until one of them turned and saw me. His face paled, but I just smiled, small and sharp, and kept going. They didn't say another word. That night, I packed my bag to leave. Not because I was giving up, but because I needed to breathe to figure out what was happening. I was zipping up my duffel when I found it, a gun tucked between my clothes. It wasn't mine. I'd never touched a gun in my life. My hands went cold, my pulse hammering in my ears. Someone had planted it, and I knew what it meant. They were setting me up, framing me for something big, maybe even trying to kill the boss. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the weapon, my mind spinning. Who would do this, Vivian, Marco? Someone else. I didn't have time to think. The door burst open, and 2 cops stormed in, cuffs ready. They dragged me out, the metal biting into my wrists. The mansion's staff watched, some smirking, some looking away. I kept my eyes on the floor, my heart pounding so loud I thought it'd burst. At the station, they threw me into a holding cell, the door slamming shut with a clang that echoed in my bones. I sat there staring at the concrete wall, wondering how my life had unraveled so fast. An hour later, the door opened. Dante walked in, his presence filling the room like a storm. The cops behind him looked nervous, their hands twitching. "She doesn't leave in cuffs," he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "She leaves with me." I didn't understand what was happening. Dante didn't look at me as he led me out, his hand light on my arm. In the car, he played a video on his phone, security footage from the mansion. It showed Marco slipping the gun into my bag, his movements quick and deliberate. My stomach dropped. Marco, the loyal one, the one who'd smiled at me. "He thought you were a liability," Dante said, his eyes on the road. "He didn't know who you really are." I wanted to ask what that meant, but then he said something that stopped me cold. "Marco's in custody now. No one touches him until you say so." Me. He was giving me the power to decide. I looked at him, searching for a trick, but all I saw was that same steady gaze, like he believed in me. The next day, I was back at work polishing the staircase banister when a delivery arrived. A small box, no note, just my name scrawled on it. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple but heavy, with that coiled snake etched into it. My heart stopped. I slipped it on my fingers, brushing the scar on my shoulder. It fit perfectly, like it was made for me. One of the maids, Clara, saw it and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not yours," she stammered. I didn't answer. I just kept polishing the bracelet, glinting in the light. Later, I heard her whispering to the others. "She's marked now. She's one of them." I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a shield, like Dante was claiming me in a way no one could ignore. The rumors didn't stop. If anything, they got louder. "Valente's losing it over a maid," they said. "He's weak." Vivian was behind it, of course. She invited me to a public apology at another one of their glittering parties. I didn't want to go, but Dante insisted. "You don't hide," he told me, his voice firm. So I went, wearing a dress that had shown up in my room. No note, just a box with deep blue silk inside. It was beautiful, heavy, like something from another life. I walked into the ballroom, my head high, even as the whispers started. Then I heard it, a gasp, then a murmur. "That's her dress," someone said. "The Queen's dress. Dante's late wife. The woman who'd been his everything." The room spun. Vivian stood there, her smile triumphant, like she'd won some game I didn't know I was playing. The crowd closed in their phones, flashing their voices, mocking. The maid thinks she's royalty. I stood there frozen, the silk clinging to my skin like a lie. I'd been set up again, humiliated in front of the entire underworld. I wanted to run, but then Dante appeared, cutting through the crowd like a blade. He didn't speak at first, just set a ring on the table, a heavy silver thing with that same coiled snake. The room went silent. "She wears what belongs to my queen," he said, his voice low, dangerous, "because she is my queen." Then he took my hand and kissed it right there in front of everyone. Vivian's face turned to stone. I pulled him aside, my heart racing. "You just started a war for me," I whispered, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "The world took you from me once," he said. "I'm taking it back." I didn't know what to feel. Anger, fear, something warmer I didn't want to name. Later in my room, I checked the dress, my fingers trembling as I felt the lining. There was something hard inside, a USB drive stitched into the fabric. I plugged it in and my breath caught. It was full of files, records of the Rossi family's deals, their secrets. Dante hadn't just given me a dress. He'd given me a weapon. But it wasn't that simple. The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. Dante had used me, hadn't he? My past, my scar, my pain, it was all part of his plan to take down his enemies. I loved him, I think, even then, but it felt like a knife in my chest. I was in the garden pulling weeds to clear my head when I found a note tucked under a rosebush. It was in Vivienne's handwriting, precise and cruel. "You're just a pawn, Lena. He'll sacrifice you when the game's done." I crumpled it in my fist, the thorns pricking my skin, drawing blood. I didn't cry. I just kept pulling weeds, each one coming up with a satisfying snap, until the ground was bare. I wasn't going to let her words take root. Vivienne made it worse. She sent me a video, some grainy footage of Dante with his late wife laughing, dancing like they were the only two people in the world. It broke something in me. I was sitting in my room watching it on loop when Marco found me. He'd escaped somehow, and now he was there, his gun pressed to my temple. "You don't get it," he said, his voice bitter. "He only loves her shadow. You're just a ghost to him." I don't know how I stayed calm. Maybe it was the years of keeping my head down, of surviving. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady. "He sees me." Marco laughed, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. I didn't fight him. I let him talk. Let him think he'd won. And when he left, I was already planning. The next evening, I was summoned to Dante's study. He was there alone, poring over papers. His tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up when I entered, but he gestured to a chair. I sat, my hands folded, waiting. Finally, he slid a photo across the desk, a grainy image of me 5 years ago, dragging him out of that diner. "I never forgot your face," he said, his voice rough. "Every night I see it." I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing the bracelet on my wrist. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He looked at me, then his eyes raw. "Because you deserved a life away from this. I failed you." I stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city lights. "You didn't fail me," I said softly. "You just didn't trust me." I left him there, the silence heavier than words. I went to the Rossi family, told them I was done with Dante, that I'd give them everything I had for a way out. They believed me. They let me into their inner circle, handed me their books, their secrets. I didn't hesitate. I slipped a tracker into their system, a tiny device I'd learned about from watching Dante's Men. Then I waited. The night of the big Mafia summit, the Rossi boss stood up, grinning, thinking he'd outplayed Dante. He didn't know his accounts were already frozen, his deals exposed. I stood in the back, my hands in my pockets, watching it all unravel. When Dante's eyes found mine across the room, I spoke just loud enough for him to hear. "You taught me how to play," I said. "I just learned how to win." His smile was small, but it was real, and it lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. Before the summit, though, there was another moment. I was in the mansion's library, dusting bookshelves, when one of Dante's allies, a man with a scar across his cheek, cornered me. "You're causing trouble," he said, his voice low, threatening. He grabbed a book, one I'd been holding, and tore a page out, letting it flutter to the floor. "You think you're untouchable now?" I didn't answer. I bent down, picked up the torn page, and smoothed it out, my hands steady. "This book's worth more than your opinion," I said, placing it back on the shelf. He stepped closer, but I didn't move. I just looked at him, my eyes steady, until he backed off, muttering under his breath. I kept dusting, but my heart was racing, and I knew I'd just drawn a line I couldn't uncross. Dante crossed the room, the chaos fading around us. "Then you're ready to rule beside me," he said, and I believed him. But Vivienne wasn't done. She cornered me at the next party, her eyes wild, desperate. She'd lost everything, her status, her power, her hold on Dante. She handed me a glass of wine, her smile too tight. "A peace offering," she said. I didn't trust her, but I took it just to see what she'd do. When I didn't drink, she grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Drink it," she hissed. I smelled it then, something sharp, chemical. Poison. I pulled away, but she was faster, stronger than I expected. She forced the glass toward my lips, and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Then Dante was there, his hand on her wrist, twisting until she dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, red wine pooling like blood. The room went quiet, every eye on us. Dante didn't look at them. He looked at me, his face unreadable. "Go," he told me, his voice low. I didn't move. I couldn't. Vivienne laughed, a brittle sound. You'll lose everything for her, she said. Your allies, your power. Dante didn't answer. He just pulled me behind him, his body a shield. But the council had seen enough. They called him a traitor, locked him away, said he'd betrayed them for a maid. I was alone in the servants' quarters the next morning, folding my old uniform, when a young maid, barely 18, slipped in. She was nervous, her hands twisting together. They're saying you ruined him, she whispered, that you're cursed. I looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, and set the uniform down. I walked over, took her hands, and squeezed them gently. They're wrong, I said, my voice soft but firm. I'm not his ruin. I'm his reckoning. She nodded, her eyes wide, and I saw something shift in her, like she believed me. I let go and turned back to my work, but her words stayed with me, fueling something fierce inside. I couldn't let it end like that. I went back to the mansion, my hands shaking as I slipped into that same blue dress, the one they'd mocked me for. I found Vivienne in the ballroom, surrounded by her new allies, all of them gloating. I walked right up to her, my head high, the dress catching the light. She laughed, that same cruel sound. You're just a maid, she said. I stepped closer, holding a glass of wine I'd poured myself. You're right, I said, my voice steady. And you're being served your last drink. I handed her the glass, my eyes never leaving hers. She took it, her hand trembling, and drank. She didn't know it was just wine, nothing more. But the fear in her eyes, she thought it was over. And it was. She collapsed not from poison, but from the weight of her own defeat. The room was silent. Every face turned to me. I didn't look at them. I walked out, my heels clicking on the marble, and found Dante in the holding room. He was sitting there, calm, like he'd been waiting for me. I didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, my heart pounding. They spilled wine on a maid, Ia said finally. You made them drown in it, but I made them drink it. His eyes lit up, a mix of surprise and pride. He stood, took my hand, and we walked out together, the mansion burning behind us, the flames licking the sky. As we stepped into the night, a man approached one of Dante's old allies, his face grim. He held out a knife, not in threat, but as a gift. You've earned this, he said, his voice rough. It's hers, from the old days. I took it, the handle warm in my hand, and saw the snake etched into the blade. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't need to. I slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing the bracelet, and nodded. Tell them I'm not just his, I said, I'm mine. He stepped back, respect in his eyes, and disappeared into the crowd. Dante squeezed my hand, and we kept walking, the firelight fading behind us. We weren't free. Not really. The world we'd built, the one we'd broken, it would come for us again. But in that moment, with his hand in mine, I didn't care. I wasn't the maid anymore. I wasn't the savior or the victim or the ghost of his past. I was Lena, and he was Dante. And we were something new, two people carrying the weight of our sins and our love, side by side. You've been through this, haven't you? Felt unseen, dismissed, like you didn't matter. But you were never small. You were always enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.